Welcome to Hot Flashbacks, where we boldly navigate the ups and downs and unexpected detours of our 30s and 40s while finally recalling how clueless we were in our 20s. I'm Molly Ward, your captain through this midlife roller coaster. Stick around for laughs, life lessons, and maybe a few I can't believe I survived that stories. Follow our journey on Instagram and Facebook at Hot Flashbacks. Make sure to like, follow, and share so I can keep making these episodes. Let's dive in. I mean, I'm just glad we're not on video because I just pulled out my back scratcher. As you can see, like I have an itch like right above my bra and I can't take it anymore.
I'll do it. Here, I'll join you with my pen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, just, this is validity that we're old. This little thing here, Walgreens Bear Claw, I have like 4 of them just kind of like sprinkled around where you might need them. Welcome to Hot Flashbacks. I'm your host, Molly Ward, and today's interview is with a friend of mine, Tasha. Tasha, say hi to the people.
Hi, people.
Yeah, that was very like sex phone operator voice, I feel like.
I do have a deep voice.
I like it. I like it. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Oh my gosh, I haven't seen you for quite a few years.
It's been a minute. Yeah.
Yes.
Really, one of the reasons I really love social media, even though it's also the same reason I sort of hate it, is that I feel connected enough to people that I don't see to be able to reach out and feel like we're still there. Does that resonate?
Absolutely. I was thinking, I don't think I've seen Molly in person for 10 plus years.
No way.
But I know what's going on. I know what's happening in your life.
You know my whole life.
You know what's happening with my life. It's amazing. So I totally agree.
In like segments, right? Like not enough to be like, I know you and I know everything.
Right.
But enough to be like, oh, how was your son's 7th birthday or whatever, right?
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
It feels so weird.
It's very
It is like
weird.
one of the things that I love about social media, but also the thing that I hate about it is that, it gives you this false sense of really having, but to the extent that we do have a relationship, I'm very happy with it. I want you to know. So thanks for being here. Why don't you just introduce yourself? Tell us where you live, what you're up to, and maybe how we know each other. I always feel like that's interesting.
Sure. I'll start with that. That makes the most sense. My name's Tasha. I'm 46 years old. So just creeping towards that 50, which is so wild to me. I still feel sometimes 18 and 19 in my body. I'm a mother of 1, so my son is 10 years old and just a wild, amazing, creative child. I'm also the wife of an artist, so a lot of creativity happening there as well in the family. I actually grew up in rural Pennsylvania, so as we get more into the topic, you'll see really how that sort of plays into kind of my core tenets and who I am. But rural Pennsylvania, moved to the Boston metro area almost 18 years ago, which is just wild to me, and have been here ever since. So spent many, many years in higher ed, which is how we know each other. So we worked on a 100th anniversary celebration for a professional organization that we are involved in. And it's wild. And I have since sort of stepped out of higher ed in some ways. I'm still connected, doing projects and sort of contract-based work, but feel like I did a good 22, 23 years in that field and have sort of shifted my life into some other areas. So that's really kind of the crux of who I am. And we can get into all the things that I do, but that's really, I think, how I identify. And I'm also, I think, in the context of your podcast, deep into perimenopause. Deep.
Okay. So I watched a video yesterday and a lady said for most American women, because apparently in India, menopause happens much sooner for women.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. There was no context provided. I feel like I need to look it up now. But apparently for women in India, it happens 10 to 13 years sooner than it does for women in America. So for women in America, the average age to start menopause is 45 to 55. Okay. But they say that perimenopause can last 7 to 10 years. And obviously so it starts before. So if you back up that timeline, you could be going through perimenopause at 35.
Truly. And I always have felt that I'm like an early bloomer in many ways. So you
You got
talk
boobs when you
about,
were like 8.
yeah, I think I
Yeah.
had my period when I was
Said all the
10.
things.
And so all of
Yeah.
that stuff, I distinctly, I'm sure my mother will love me, revealing her truth, but she had a good 10 years of
Ugh.
menopause. And so lots of ups and downs. And, looking back on it, I realize now what was happening, but I just thought my mom is mean and she's not nice. And we're having a lot of conflict and what's going on. But I thought it was so interesting if I think about it, because she had me very young, and I'll talk about that story. And so when she was in menopause, I was really in my late 20s or maybe early mid 20s. I chose to have my son later in life at 37. And so he is unfortunately experiencing me and my symptoms at really formative time in his life. And so I think about that on a daily basis. Sort of
Yeah.
how I'm feeling and acting and interacting is much more impactful on him at his age at 10 than it necessarily was to me 19, 20, 24 years old. So I think that's one of the caveats in some ways about people that choose to have children a little bit later and go through this. So that,
Yeah,
and
because if
yeah,
you have kids when you're younger, you're right. You may, if you have kids when you're 20 or 25, then they're out
yeah,
of the house. And so then
correct.
you're, I mean, not that your menopausal experience is necessarily any better, but maybe like you're impacting fewer individuals with
Right,
your craziness, right?
right. But I am a little tornado around everyone. So yeah,
But wasn't that the same case before? I mean, is that really just a
that's true.
menopausal thing?
That's true.
So when you and I chatted about what we wanted to talk about, you came up with this idea, and I love it because I'm one of the things I love about doing this podcast is I learn so much from other people's experiences and being able to both validate my own aging process as well as sort of understand and respect everybody's process is different. And you brought the topic up, and we were chatting a little bit about you run marathons. And as far as I can tell, that is like a recent, all things being equal, right? 40, 46 years
Yeah,
old, a more recent development for you. And so when we chatted about that, you mentioned that you really found your way to running through working through some trauma and how
true.
much the running has been therapeutic for you.
Sure. And, I'm not going to, for the sake of your listeners, go back and tell my whole life story, but I think it's important. I was thinking about what is my original trauma. And so I thought, let me pinpoint that for anyone listening. And so there's kind of twofold for really how I grew up as a child and then sort of how it manifested itself. And then all the stuff I had to unlearn as an adult. One of them is growing up poor. So I grew up extremely poor in rural Pennsylvania. As I said, my mother and had me very young. I think my parents were 21 or 22 years old and probably just, figuring out life themselves. I am the oldest of three. And there was actually kind of a significant age difference between me and my younger brother, almost 10 years age difference. But growing up poor is the original shame for me. So not having enough, growing up in rural Pennsylvania. I mean, my world
Well,
was
and
very
that's
small, but yeah.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting to me because I majored in social work. And one of the things I remember learning that really stood out to me was that there are only, and don't quote me on the number, like 6 or 8 things really that psychologists have determined that can happen to you that actually change the core of who you are, right? So children are born with like, I don't know, 4,000 characteristics. And yes, we're influenced by environment, we're influenced by parenting, but as you know, by being a parent yourself, there are some things about your child that you are not going to change, right?
Right.
And the only thing that they've identified that changes who you are to the core, there's like 6 of them. And one of them is poverty.
Oh,
The other one is like death of a parent or a close loved one. There are some other major things, but poverty is a big one.
yeah, I can absolutely relate to that. And it was odd growing up in Pennsylvania because there was a mix of people that were just like me, people that worked on farms and lived on farms and didn't have a lot of money. And then there were people that were sort of, I would say, middle class or upper middle class. My best friend was actually, what I would term rich. And so I loved going to her house. I loved.
What did she have? Like, what were you like?
She
Oh,
had a
she's
pool,
rich. She
the
has.
indoor pool.
Ooh,
She had
okay.
the in-ground,
Okay.
pool, tons of vacation. So always going to New York City, went to Australia, bungee jumping, like just, sort of had everything. Her house was very put together, really nicely done. We shared bedrooms at my house. We had a very, very small house. We had questionable plumbing. And my parents, my mother was a stay-at-home mom, but my dad, I mean, he worked hard. He was a contractor, but he was an independent contractor. So always going to make his own money and had been working his whole life. So my frame, the bubble was actually kind of small, but really what let me know where I sat at a very young age was television. So I had always been pretty obsessed with celebrity culture. So, what did other people have? Sort of MTV, celebrities, movies. I was very interested in teen magazines, right? 17, all of that let me know I was very far from that lifestyle. I was always obsessed with moving to California. So all of that sort of encompassed. So I very much was always kind of a daydreamer and thought I would like to get out of here, and didn't really know sort of how that would happen. But so that's sort of one of my core tenets that I had to work out much later in life about sort of poverty. I wouldn't say I didn't get things. I actually had opportunities to sort of do things, but my parents had to work very hard to make that happen. So squirrel away money, save up things. We had, I don't know if I'm making references people even know, but like layaway clothes. So we put pay for clothes
Layaway,
out.
yeah.
We had to lay away our clothes and put payments on our clothes. I believe my mom paid my braces off over like 2 or 3 years. So there was just a lot of that.
At the time, you mentioned how hard your dad was working and how hard your parents worked to give you the life that you had. Did you recognize that at the time, or is that like when I was 28, I acknowledged sort of situation?
No, I was very embarrassed about what my parents did and sort of was able to talk about this later in life. But my mother was a stay-at-home mom, but she cleaned houses. And I was so embarrassed by that my mom was going into other people's houses, particularly people that maybe I knew or parents of my friends and things like that. And I just didn't want people to know that that's what my mom did. And my dad, he worked hard, but I don't know how to explain this. The visual interpretation of my dad is he's just like a little like mountain man. And so I was embarrassed at times of what he looked like. And so I just didn't want people to know that. So I just lived in this other world and just spent a lot of time at my friends' houses. They did not come to my house. I mean, my friends have over the years, but I really tried to like just keep things out. But to your exact question, when I went to college, which was the first time that I was really away from home, I had what I would term as like this pivotal moment that I think some college students have, which is the reflection piece. And I remember writing this letter and like, oh, I'm only here because of you. And I'm so sorry. I was a terrible daughter, And so I had this sort of shift where it was a bit of an aha.
I'm living for this moment. Like this is the moment that I think parents live for. So I'm glad that you gave it to your parents, because some people never do. But every time something is difficult at home or with the kids, in my mind, I'm living for that moment. Like someday, whether it's 21 or 28 or 35, they're going to look back and say, "Oh, I see."
Yep.
And thank you. That's what I'm living my life for. So I'm glad that you had that moment. And I'm really glad for your parents that they got to have that moment too, because I think it probably is important.
And that was nice. And there wasn't a lot of receiving of feelings back and forth. That's probably another piece that really led me to therapy and inner child work later, which is we just didn't talk about feelings. So I never heard my parents say, "Oh, I'm scared, I'm nervous, I'm anxious." They would yell, they would retreat into themselves. My dad would have what my mom calls the mood every winter, which we now know is seasonal depression. So he would lay on the couch, the mood, and that went on for 20 years. It would just be this sort of naming of thing, but not talk about what it was. So there's not, I don't remember honestly getting a hug or a kiss. I'm sure I did until I left for college. So, so there was just a lot of that. And again, they were young. They had my brother 2 years after me, and then my younger brother like 9 or 10 years later. So the growing up poor piece is really one of the roots of, I think, trauma, and the stuff that I had to kind of pull out of how I felt and how I interacted with the world. And the second piece is very common, unfortunately, in families, which is addiction. So I grew up not for a long time really realizing that was the undertone of not my immediate family. So my parents don't have addiction issues, but they are termed what's called adult children, right, of alcoholics or addicts. And so they grew up in those very tumultuous, chaotic environment. More so my dad, I should say, on his side. And so his mother was an alcoholic. His dad, so my paternal grandfather died when my dad was 12 from alcoholism. So literally liver failure in the hospital. So lots of that. And then all of my dad's sisters, which most of them have passed, were functioning alcoholics. And so there was always this air of kind of wildness and craziness and, oh, someone fell off the picnic table and broke their leg. And as a child, I didn't quite know that it was connected to alcohol. It just felt like, oh, that was a funny story. Remember when Aunt Tony did this or Aunt Terry did this? But it took me a while to realize that was it, that the people around me were sort of not well.
Yeah.
Kind of what was going on. And I always feel, even to this day, my intuition is super strong and it's almost always dead on about people later in life. And I feel like I may have honed that as being a bit hypervigilant as a child. So sort of watching how people were interacting, the safe and unsafety that was around me. Yeah.
Right. And especially if you do grow up poor, often you also feel unsafe, right? So you're not ever sure something's going to be working, or your parents are struggling. Like you said, the plumbing's not good. And so that becomes a big thing because now we can't have water, the toilet doesn't work, or we don't have heat. And those things can then cause your parents to, as one would when they don't have heat in the winter, become upset or frustrated. And so you're constantly monitoring their emotions and being hyper vigilant about how to act in a given situation, right? So you walk into your kitchen and there's nothing to eat for dinner and you already get the vibe. You could tell your mom is not happy about that. And so those are the kinds of things that can be really helpful as you grow up, is to be able to read a room, but can also be really harmful when you're so used to being hyper vigilant of everyone else's feelings that you don't actually have time to, or have the energy to figure out what your own are.
Truly. And then I think the third piece of that is, and I experience this literally to this day, which is, I have close friends and core groups of friends, but the hypervigilance sometimes makes me read into things that are not there. And so, oh, my friend sent that text. What's the tone of that? I don't understand. Oh, they must be upset with me. They're upset with me, And so, of course, I learned skills to sort of check that out with people later. But so there's that. There's just the sort of always watching people and sort of meaning making what's going on around me, which, very much impacted both work and personal, professional relationships until I really got into therapy. So those sort of were the two things. And then also then more, I think, present in my life is then my brother actually, well, I don't even know. I use the word, I'm quoting a lot here. Tell your listeners I'm air quoting. I was going to say became an addict, but addiction presented itself in his life and at a very young age, and has been a heroin addict now for, it's wild to say this out loud, about 27 years. And so active addiction, in and out of federal, prisons and more treatments than you can count. And so there still is that piece that exists even after all the grandparents have passed and the alcoholic aunts. And so I don't have sort of this core group around me that's sort of still drinking, but I have this sort of piece about this heaviness about my brother that exists. And we've gone many years without speaking, and then some years. And very traumatic things have happened around his addiction that you think as a family, well, this couldn't get worse. It couldn't possibly get worse. And then it gets worse and, it sort of hit a new bottom. And so, so that's sort of the pieces that I carried with me through much of my childhood and into my adulthood. And it's funny how this is how it presented itself. My trauma presented itself as being extremely insecure inside, extremely, but very much projecting like I was not. So
lots of confidence, but not really. Hey, I'm a fan.
Anger. I still love sarcasm. But do you ever hear what they say about sarcasm? Sarcasm and anger are the bodyguards of sadness. And so sometimes I remember that. I think, when I'm doing this, I'm probably trying to put sort of something in front of a sad, anxious feeling. And so a lot of anger, a lot yeah, and then some anxiety. But if you would ask people what I was like in high school, they would probably tell you that I was mean, that I was a bit of a bully, and not in the sense of probably how we see bullying or cyberbullying now, but just a
Uh-huh.
lot of outward projection. But I had a core group of friends that I really liked, and I was very academically gifted. And so we were sort of the smart, athletic kids. Uh,
Yeah. I
and
wanted to be
so,
that kid. I
yeah,
was
so there,
I was definitely not that kid.
but it was just a lot of that, a lot of pushing people away, keeping people at arm's length, saying mean things. Yeah, and it continued for a long time. But I didn't see myself as that. Later on, people reflected that to me. They would say, like, you were not that kind in high school. And I thought, is that true? I don't know. I hate to hear that
Ouch.
about myself. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
wrote the other piece is I would write like really cringy things in people's yearbooks. And I remember this actually a really specific example when we had our 20 or 20th anniversary. My friend bought examples of yearbooks to lay out on the table, and she had to like Sharpie out stuff I wrote in. And so that was like, so some of that stuff when you get it
Like she
reflected
didn't want
back
her
to
parents
you.
to read it. Is that
No,
like,
no, it was
ooh,
just
it wasn't like have a bitch in summer.
no, it was like I would always want to say shocking things. So people were like, "Oh,
Yeah.
Tasha's cool," and she just said this really shocking thing. And so I thought if I ever run for political office, I can't because the dirt and the VHS tapes and the video and the stuff I wrote in yearbooks would just,
Everyone's out
come
there with their yearbooks,
come
taking
back to
pictures
bite
and
me. I was like, thank God I got into higher ed and I moved out and I moved to an urban area and I know better, so I do better. But back then, absolutely not.
yearbook writing. I mean, this
Well,
isn't very smart because people save yearbooks forever. Like
forever.
if you would have like given them a 4x6 photo and like written something ridiculous on it, it probably still wouldn't exist. But you were in their yearbook. Like
True.
anybody can go right now and
Yeah.
find their yearbook from 25 years ago in like a hot second. So
It's
you're right.
it's
Yeah, political office is not an
terrible.
option for you.
It's
So,
terrible. Now, if I ever
so
wanna know my friends' phone numbers, I can go into the yearbook
there you
and see
go.
their
Yeah.
last 4 digits that they wrote, but
Last four digits. That's so you can like hack into their email or
right.
something.
Yeah.
So quite a bit of trauma growing
Yeah.
up, and really bringing a lot sort of into your mid 20s and your college experience, like you said. So we know that the end story is that you get into running and marathons, but tell
Yeah.
me what your 30s looked like in terms of navigating your mental health and your physical health. Sort of what did that look like, and what were you doing at that time to work through some of those things?
Sure. I'll summarize my 20s before my 30s because I think it informs. And when you described your 20s, that was exactly how mine were. My 20s were horrible, horrible up until I would say 28 or 29 years old. I actually got married very early, so I sort of repeated a bit of a cycle that my parents did. Although my parents are still happily married after, they're almost creeping towards 50 years maybe now or 48 years. I got married very young. And so my 20s, the way to describe my 20s, doing drugs and drinking. So I did that for a lot of my life until my late 20s, started very early. And so just partying and hanging out with my friends. And I was holding down jobs. I was, working in higher ed and doing all types of things. But I was in a bit of a tumultuous marriage, I would say. And we were really bonded by like using in some ways. That was really what we were doing. And at some point, I just wanted to stop. And so I just wanted to stop. I was actually getting a bit paranoid in my head. Things were starting to like not feel right in my non-using times. And so I felt like I'm really doing some damage here. Let me stop. And I did. And that actually started to perpetuate my divorce. And so that really, I was only married 2 years, but that person became very foreign to me because I was no longer doing drugs and drinking. I may have been drinking casually, but no drugs. And so sort of all my friends, all his friends, him, just sort of, it felt very distant. And I got into therapy and I thought, before we get divorced, let's try to sort of save what we have. The 2 years, the year and a half we've been together.
All the time we invested.
Yes,
Yeah.
all the youth. And we started couples therapy. And I remember feeling like it was a breath of fresh air for me. But I did what typically people do when they go into couples therapy, which is point the finger at the other person. So could you change that person, therapist? It's not me. I mean, sure, I have stuff, but I'd really like you to change, my husband. And so I spent a lot of time grinding around that, which was sort of not the way to do therapy. And then we ended up getting divorced. And I quickly got into another relationship. So I always call myself a serial monogamous. So you're my boyfriend. Now you're my boyfriend. Now you're my boyfriend. I've never dated anyone. I've never been out on a date ever. It's just boom,
Wow.
boom. We're moving in together. We have a joint checking account.
Are you sure you're not a lesbian? Because I'm pretty sure this is how we do it.
That's true. That's true. That's
Like,
true.
how are you finding these men? Because all my friends are always complaining about how
know.
I've been dating forever and they won't marry
Yeah.
me and they never call me back. And here you are, just like you hauling with guys.
I find the nice broken ones, right? And that I can mother, that need
Yes,
me.
there you go.
So
You're filling
and
your own glass.
yeah, so it's always been that way. And so I met my current husband 6 weeks after I separated from my ex-husband. And I tell a bit of this funny story, which is the first text message I ever sent was when I met my current husband in 2003. And I met him earlier in the day through another student. He was working at the university I was working at. And I sent this really ridiculous T9 text message, right? I had to T9 it out on my Nokia brick phone. And it said, I thought it was so clever. It said, "Can I see you tonight, tomorrow, or March?" And it was like November. And he thought that was the best thing he thought, oh, that's really cool. I'm going to go see this girl tonight. And
I like that you took the time to give 3 options via T9 because it is not easy.
It was a commitment to type that out. And
so
he showed up at my house.
Oh,
he
no,
showed up at my house.
Okay. Wow.
Midnight, I would guess we would call it a booty call. And we've been together ever since. So we are coming up with 20 years of that. But what was funny about that, he walked into the house and my ex-husband and I were separated. And all my ex-husband's shoes were there. Our wedding pictures are all over the house. And he was like, "What am I getting into here?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Don't worry about it." So
you guys probably did a lot of growing up together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, that would be based on what you've said and what you've experienced. And I'm no psychiatrist, but it seems like the two of you have had to, I would guess, do a lot of parenting of each other at some points. But that growing together is maybe what kept you together as long as you have been.
Yeah. And so, so you're absolutely, I was just trying to think about this time that my current mother-in-law and my husband and I were having a bit of a bump. And she said, "You guys can separate if you want to. Go ahead." And she actually, it was really interesting. She said to me, "But I believe, Tasha, you will take your stuff into your next relationship." And I thought, how dare she say that to me?
Yeah, like, who are you?
She was absolutely right. But she said, "If you two would like to do your healing work together, I believe that you should stay together." And that's always kind of been the foundation for my current husband and I. Like, are you the person I want to continue to do this healing work with? Yes. Okay, we're going to kind of make it work. And so my 30s were all about trying to untangle all of that trauma. And so, to circle back to the addiction piece, my current husband has been in recovery since he was 21 years old. 3 months after, I think I was still probably casually drinking, I stopped drinking. So I haven't had a drink in 20 years, which is just wild to me.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you. We started on this path of doing work. And so he's in a 12-step program. I am not. I've been in sort of different support 12-step programs, Al-Anon, and some different Anon programs, but he was really the catalyst for me to start looking at my shit, basically, and myself. And it was extremely messy for both of us. And so he was really kind of, I think, 30 or 3 years into sobriety when I met him. And so if you've ever been around someone, there's sort of this pink cloud in the beginning for years where everything feels great. And then it sort of teeters off. And so he had this lovely energy around him. People wanted to be around him, and he was doing a lot of work. And I thought, oh, I want to be part of that stuff. And so we just started doing individual therapy. We did couples therapy, which you'll probably know, a modality called EMDR work, which is like a bilateral stimulation of the brain. And so it works really well for people that have obsessive compulsive. It actually works well for people that have eating disorders. But I had a lot of like kind of compulsive thought patterns in my head. And so that work saved my life. When I say it saved my life, I took to it so well. I did it for 9 months, and I was able to really have a clear thought process. So those sort of compulsive things would still happen in my head, but they didn't hold weight anymore. They didn't keep me kind of attached. And so EMDR coupled with for me, antidepressants at that time were like the game changer. And so I started doing that, and that was extremely helpful for 14 years. I stayed on antidepressants and just continued to do work around there. And then I think the sort of the key of really going deep was I did inner child work. And so my husband he joined a group of 6 people to do inner child work for 3 straight years. And so he did the group, and he would come home and be just a mess. And the group was really interesting. It was, about reparenting yourself. It was really getting to the core of your inner child. And then coupled with it was this really lovely practice called gift giving, where people would literally give your inner child gifts, things that you thought that they would like. And it was really sort of reprogramming how you interacted with people. It was really lovely. And so he did that for 3 years. And immediately when that ended, the therapist said, "Would you like to do it, Tasha, for 3 years?" And so we sort of joke, we had this 6-year period in our life where we're just bawling and writing letters to our parents and crying and smashing plates against walls and doing all of these different like therapeutic modalities. And the whole time you're feeling like this is never going to get better. This will never change. This will never shift anything. And instead it shifted everything. It shifted everything in our lives. And was sort of the third life-saving piece for me to be able to talk about all of those extremely shameful things from my childhood. I mean, I wrote it all down. I told it to all the people publicly, and that was kind of one of the core pieces of it. You have to say it out loud to someone else to sort of like release it from its power. And internally, or sort of intern, it very much shifted my relationship with my parents, which is actually what sometimes people see in these groups, which is your parents may never change. So my parents actually haven't changed as people. They sort of say the same shit, but I don't get triggered by it anymore. I don't go to the fight. I don't take the bait. I don't.
Yep.
And I really mean that truly. And so that has been tremendously helpful in many, many areas of my life, including in my professional relationships and sort of the way that I interact at work. And it's really just giving people their stuff back. That's you. I'm not going to take that on. I know who I am. I know who I am inside. And and that was really sort of what has propelled what we refer to as really everything that's great that's happened in our lives. And it doesn't mean that everything's great. The shit still happens. Like really terrible things still happen. But the way in which I can show up for those things has been night and day. So the bully from high school has found some way to really be at peace with herself, really be able to make amends to people, even in the moment of things that I sort of mess up on. And just say like, wow, that was not really what I wanted to say. Let me sort of like re-say this or retell you, it in a different way. So that's been very helpful.
That's powerful stuff though.
Yeah.
I think I would say that like learning to apologize was probably one of my biggest life lessons. I remember as a child struggling to apologize and it was a real issue between me and my parents that I didn't take accountability and I struggled with apologizing for things. I don't think I've gone over the top, but I have a lot of respect for the ability to say, oops, my bad, sorry, or my fault, I messed that up. And once you get to that point where you can do that, it can be so healing and it's so helpful for other people to have someone in their lives like that. I'm saying, just like, let me describe how helpful it is for people to have me in their lives. Like, they're so blessed. That is not what I meant.
It's the truth, though.
I just meant like, I see why apologizing is important and taking responsibility and also just being willing to be like, I'm the one who effed that up. And and it's helped me. You talk about your professional relationships. I mean, it's one of the biggest things I feel like has helped me in my career is, that I'm not perfect. And I'm going to say, I'm going to own it. I'm not going to put it on my staff. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. If I messed something up or I didn't send that email or I didn't do the thing, I'm just going to own it. And
Yeah.
people can appreciate that we're not perfect. And, I said this before, but I think that's what you said about like, my life isn't perfect, right? Are you doing all this work on yourselves and it's a really good place, but that doesn't mean that everything is good all the time. It just means your ability to show up and handle things well is there. There's never a perfect time. As I think about this when we talk about people saying, oh, I don't want to get married until sort of like A, B, or C, or I don't want to have kids until 1, 2, and 3 all happen. And it's like, I mean, it's good to plan and it's good to use logic and your emotions, but at the same time, I think my discovery in my late 30s was there's always something. And so learning how to handle it is going to be pivotal really for most people. And I think there's people who learn to handle and there's people who don't deal.
It's so true. And I get triggered very easily, and I think just the difference is I really truly do know what my triggers are. And I don't always say I'm sorry first. My husband will tell you sometimes I'll go to him and say, could you just say you're sorry? And then I can, but you need to say it first and then I will. And then it's sort of like it releases my armor a little bit. And then I usually end up crying and sort of owning my part in whatever it is. And we try not to, obviously, we call them having bumps and not arguments. And so my husband feels very strongly about not saying like we're having a fight or an argument. So we really talk about it like bumps or we're not sort of connecting. But unfortunately, my son has seen that. He's an only child. We're a bit of a trio. And so we work really hard to bring him into the apology piece where I say, I would like you to hear me apologize to dad and my tone was not right. And that must've been scary for you. And so that has really helped our little trio of communication. And we see that he can do that a little bit easier. That's something I would never, ever see in my household growing up. Never.
Yeah. Well, conflict resolution is difficult, but you're right. A lot of people, especially I would say people of our generation, when you talked about feelings, didn't see resolution. You might have seen conflict and you might have seen a lot of it, but it was rare that you would see resolution of conflict in a positive way. And so I think that our conflict resolution skills are, I mean, I'm just glad we're not on video because I just pulled out my back scratcher, as you can see. Like I have an itch like right above my bra, and I can't take it anymore.
I'll do it. Here, I'll join you with my pen. Okay. Yeah, we'll just
this is validity that we're old. This little thing here, Walgreens Bear Claw. I have like 4 of them just kind of like sprinkled around where you might need them. And it's so funny because I'm so my dad. I used to sit in the car as a teenager and my dad would just reach back and pull out this back scratcher and scratch his back while he was driving. And I'm like, really? Is it that serious? And now I'm just like, I got one of these in my office. I got one by my nightstand. Like my dad always had one like wedged into the recliner. So every time he sat down, he could just scratch his back. And I got to tell you, props to my dad. It's brilliant. There's no reason to go around with an itchy back.
Is our skin old, right? It's old and flaky now.
I think maybe so. I don't want to, I'm nervous about like the, what they call like crepe skin, which is when, especially for women, you get that like really thin kind of skin and then it like you bleed all the time. Cause I already bleed all the time. Like I'm already like, my hands are always cut up. I'm always like burnt. I hurt myself. Like yesterday I was trying to scrape some glue off of the wood floor. And my wife was like, okay, I'm leaving now. So I need you to put the razor away.
Oh, right. I don't trust you.
No, I'm fine. She's like, no. You're not going to do that when there's no one home. I'm like a child when it comes to these things. So
I love it.
Tell me about your relationship with fitness in your 30s and 40s.
Perfect. Yes. Very long way to get back to your original question, right?
No, it's all good. Yeah.
So, prior to running, and you are absolutely correct, that is a bit of a newer endeavor, and I'll tell you how I got into it, but I actually had always been pretty fit. And I would say, I mean, you can't see me now other than you, but I was smaller. I was in a smaller body. So just, no other way to say that.
She is a smoke show.
So I'm in a bit of a bigger body now, and that's fine. And so I didn't have to try very hard growing up. Although I do always think it's funny. I was a chain smoker for many years. And so I would chain smoke my way to the gym. And why they had an ashtray outside the gym, I don't know, like one of those receptacles, but I would stand outside, finish my cigarette, put my cigarette out, and then go and just like bust ass on the elliptical, so it was a lot of like just really pushing, but I didn't have to try.
Yeah, but
I didn't.
that's the something is better than nothing mentality, right? No,
Yeah,
I mean, in some ways I think it can be really helpful because it's baby steps. And if that's the one step you needed was to
right.
get to the gym,
I was
it
in
didn't
there.
mean you had to like quit eating carbs and quit smoking and, quit doing all the terrible things. I mean,
Yeah,
truly, like if you try to do all of those things at once, you probably will fail. And so the
right.
fact is that you were there. Like, yeah, the thing you did before wasn't great, but you were
But I
there. I
got
give
there.
you credit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the lung capacity seemed fine on the elliptical, and then I would smoke as soon as I got out. It was just wild. But so I had to do very little growing up. Played field hockey, so just really worked out. And to be totally honest, and no surprise, was given a lot of compliments about my body. Right, had a very thin waist. Like it just, so guys liked that. Whatever. And then and then I just went through a period of what I think a lot of parents or people do, which is sort of this period of inactivity, right? I was pregnant, I was stressed, I was working in higher ed, doing events, right? So late nights, weekends, all this stuff. And I was eating the same foods that I tried to eat when I was 20. Taco Bell, all this really sort of wasn't interested in preparing foods, things like that. And then I had my son, and yeah, it really just became all about him really for, 5, 6, 7 years. He was, a lot of friends know this, he was a terrible sleeper. So he did not sleep one entire week, like through the night for 7 years. And so every single night or every two to
You have a
three nights,
journal.
oh my gosh,
You're
we
like,
were up. We tried everything that people wanted to say. Did you try this for your son? And eventually he turned 7 and he began sleeping through the night. And so then I feel like, oh, here's my life. Oh, I have a life now. And so the last sort of 3 to 4 years is when I picked up running. And in 2019, I living
I
in
want to say something
Boston.
really quick about
Oh,
this.
sure.
You can pick up hobbies late in life. Like
Totally.
you can reinvent yourself. You can be
Totally.
new and different, right? Like I think sometimes people are nervous. I've never run or I've never lifted weights or I never climbed a rock before, but like it is
Totally.
important to know that you can reinvent yourself and that you can do new things in your 30s, in your 40s, even in your 50s. So
It's so true. And I know everyone that does like whatever their sport is, right? Rock climbing or cycling. Well, they almost everyone will say, like, oh, this community is the best community. I have really found the running community to be that type of community for me. May not be for other people. I know there are people of color that have problems with the running community and the sort of whiteness and the privilege surrounding it. So I definitely want to acknowledge that piece. And for your listeners, I'm a white woman. So, and tend to now sit on the more privileged side of a socioeconomic status. But for me, in my personal experience, the running community, as far as body, ability, age, has been extremely helpful to me. And so I woke up in 2019 and I thought, I'm going to sign up for this race in Boston. And it was a Reebok women's 10K. Signed up for the race, had never really run in my life, only had probably like some beat up Nike shoes that I was wearing. So I signed up for it. And after I signed up for it, then I Googled, how far is a 10K? So I had no idea the distance when I signed up. And I thought, okay, 2 miles or whatever. I think I could do that. That was 2.5 weeks before the race. And I didn't train. And I just went out there and I just ran it. And I think I ran it in like long tights. It was in October, but still, I've learned to run in much less clothes now. And just went out there and truly actually had one of the fastest times that I've had in the 10K distance. So,
oh my
but
gosh.
in connected to sort of the original topic is I just would go out there and kind of like power through. And that feels like the trauma part of me. It feels like the part that's just like, just do this. Like, like I have there's like some really positive runners, right, that have positive mantras in their heads. And I'm the type of runner that's like, this fucking sucks. Like, keep fucking doing this. Like, blah, blah, like
I just thought you're holding a proverbial
yeah,
gun to your head while
yeah.
you're saying this. I don't know
But
if you're aware.
I come from this like really like almost like negative self-talk, but it sort of fuels me in some ways. But so I would go out there and run, and truly I would think about some of the sad and challenging things in my life. I would think about my brother. I would think about him being incarcerated. I would think, okay, just push your body. So it was a lot about like just push with no real sense of how to do things correctly, in a healthy way, in a sustainable way around running. And so that's how I ran for probably 2 years. Just signed up for things and just like went for it and didn't know anything about anything. And in 2021, or wait, 2020, yes. In 2021, I watched a story on Instagram about the last finisher of the New York City Marathon. And it was this person named Mario, and he ran for this addiction recovery nonprofit called Release Recovery in New York. And it took him, don't quote me on this, 11 hours, maybe 12 hours to finish. And it was really inspiring to me. And so they had shut down the course. They had moved him onto the sidewalk. His nonprofit came out to run with him. I was so inspired that I signed up for the 2022 New York City Marathon at midnight. I like woke up in the middle of the night and I signed up on my phone. I registered. I had to run with a charity because I would never qualify for the time. And I texted my girlfriend at midnight, knowing she would see it at 6, 7 a.m. And I said, I just signed up for the New York City Marathon. I'm going to need you to do the same so I have someone to run it with. And she was like, you're crazy. Thank you. And she did. And so a little shout out to Allison O'Connor, who we call Coots.
Allison.
Signed up and we trained. And so we ran the 2022 New York City Marathon, which was really the greatest and worst experience of my entire life. And I include childbirth and everything in there. I thought I was prepared. I really suffered at about mile 19 and ran really in a haze for the next 6 miles. And so, now we know I was underfueled. I was what they call bonking. I was really depleted. And it took me actually 7 hours to run that race, which is sort of wild. And there's a really interesting quote by an elite runner, which a lot of people know, Eliud Kipchoge, who holds like the world record for marathons. And he said, it's not the elite runners that are impressive. Sure, that's impressive. It's the slow runners that continue to put one foot in front of the next for 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours. Those are the real heroes of the marathon. And so that's always sort of sat with me.
Like want to drive for 7 hours.
I know, it's terrible.
I mean, really,
it's terrible. I mean, there's some walking, of course, in there, but I sort of caught the bug from there. And so
what is this proverbial bug, though? Because I've been looking for a bug like this, and it doesn't want to attach itself to me.
So I am very achievement focused, and I sort of say this a bit like tongue in cheek. I run for the medals. I want a medal. I don't want to run a race that doesn't have a medal that you put around my neck. I don't want something else. I don't want free beer. I want the medals. And that's sort of like how I mark, my completion. And so, yeah, and I like to do something that feels big. And so that's also, it's a bit of a trauma response too, in some ways. So it's both healing. It's the fact that I can get there and do this, but it's always back to this a bit core piece that's like, I got to do things a little bit bigger and grander. And so I decided that I was going to run what's called the Abbott World Majors, which are the 6 world major marathons that are under sort of the Abbott umbrella. And they're mostly what people know, but New York, Chicago, Boston, obviously the big one here, and then Tokyo, London, and Berlin. And so I ran Chicago last year. I took 30 minutes off my time. Or no, I took an hour off my time. I think I ran in 6 minutes. Yeah, I actually had an injury during the race. I'm running Berlin in 82 days, I believe. So I'm trying to get what they call stars. So I'm trying to get this 3rd star. And my goal really is, as I head towards my 50th birthday, I would like Boston to be my last. So my sort of homecoming race. Yeah. And I would like to run that on my 50th birthday year and be done.
It's amazing. My guest from last week lives in Berlin. So I can tell her, and maybe she'll come hold up a sign for you. She would. She's a really nice person.
That would be great. Tell her mile 19 when I start to like tank and go downhill. I need a little
okay.
So
I will let her know.
That's it. That's been sort of like now a bit of my core identity. And I don't necessarily get like the runner's high. I'm just about seeing what my body is capable of. And that's really what I've been doing. But, that's not possible without the things that came before it, without the healing, without sort of carving out the space to be in a better space. And I run much differently now. I have every specialist you could think of sort of in my pocket, but know a lot about fueling, know about what shoes and clothes to wear, know sort of how to prepare for the race. And and my partner since left me, so I have been preparing for this next race by myself, but I'm pretty excited, and my family plays a part in that as well. They always come with me to the races. So yeah, and I certainly think about 5, 6, 7 hours is a lot of time to think about your life too when you're out there running. And so there's this mix of completely blank brain, not thinking about anything, and then really replaying your life, like thinking about people in your life, thinking about ways that you've healed. Almost always people cry on the marathon. I have shed tears at different parts, whether that's sort of gratitude, like, wow, I'm doing this big thing, or,
Or
or,
pain
or
and suffering.
Jesus, yes, please, I need a banana right now. I will take a
Well,
street banana from anyone on the side of the
is
road.
interesting that you say that you mentioned that you sort of came back to that point about thinking while you're running, because I wrote it down when you were talking earlier about these long times that you're spending with yourself. And when I think about spending a long time inside of my brain, I don't want to do it. And so I think there's a couple ways people cope with running mentally. There's either you go to a different place, right?
Really?
Through music, through visualization, whatever it is, you are somewhere else. You are thinking through your day, like you said, through your life, resolving these things, or you're bored. And I think that's what happens to me, is that I'm bored. I don't
Yeah.
want to do the other two things. My ADHD brain has me thinking about all of these things and wanting to write them down or do them or complete them or mark them off or call the person and let them know. And I find running to be very difficult for me that way.
Yeah.
The only time I've ever been a decent runner in terms of like sort of showing up and doing it and completing it and working on a time was when I was at Orange Theory Fitness. And I think the reason that that worked for me was because all throughout the time I spent on the treadmill, someone was talking to me.
Oh,
It's
yes.
right. There's encouragement, sure, but then there's also, hey, here's what we're going to do next, and you should be thinking about this, and check your heart rate. And for me, that just kept me occupied enough to forget that I was running. And the problem is when I go out to run, I quit. I guess like I'm
Fair enough.
not that good. Like I feel
Yeah.
like my body could do it. I feel like I
Yeah.
want to reach that. It's like my brain that won't let me do it. I can turn on music. It doesn't matter. My ADHD brain is just constantly telling me all of these things that I need to be doing or could be
Yeah.
doing or should be thinking about or should resolve or should work on, to the point where I have to stop because now I have to go take care of something.
Yeah. I could,
And I
I
can
could
justify
relate to
to
that
myself.
piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, not in that same sense, but so I'm someone that really likes to do things solo, and I feel like I don't need to do them with someone else. But I will tell you, running with someone else, and that had been suggested to me for a while, and I was like, that's annoying. There's so many things like, what if we're not the same pace, and do we have to talk the whole time, and all this stuff. But when I had a run partner, and I've had some various, opportunities to run with people, it did shift it. I will say that it shifts it. It makes the time pass faster. And there was a nice balance of figuring out like, okay, I'm going to put my headphones in now, or oh, you're going to go up a half mile and I'm just going to like watch you, or, and so that I miss that now that I don't have that I don't have a run partner. I didn't realize that piece. And the second piece is I'm actually similar to you. I don't run just to run. I only train for races. So I'm not out there. I have plenty of friends that like 4 times a week run 3 miles just for their own mental health and whatever. Like, no, if I'm training for a race, I'm doing a race, or I'm just not doing anything. So I'm like, I don't love to run just to run. I just like the accomplishment. And the last piece I'll say about, I think, marathons, but it could be any race, but for me, the marathon is, there's very few sports where it's an individual achievement amongst a larger like community and group at the same time. Bike riding or like, but there's not much that you're sort of like doing your own individual thing, but you're amongst community. And I actually really love that piece, which is surprising because people don't know this about me, but I'm a deep introvert, deep introvert. And so I generally don't like to be around anyone. But
So those 6 hours running alone are like exactly what you need.
yeah, it's like, it's my stuff, but I'm sort of, I can see these people. And what's I think really beautiful about the marathon is the humanity of people. So I am passing people that have all kinds of abilities, have all kinds of things printed on their shirts about what they're running for. I'm walking 2 miles with this dude who looks like an NBA athlete, but he's tanked too, and so we're the same. Like, he's not any better than I am. He has to walk now. And so we're walking, and so I just love the humanity about kind of the marathon or long distance running. And people often say, are you going
it's
to,
hard.
yeah,
I feel like it's one of those things, like it's hard for everybody at some point, right? If you're running a marathon,
yeah,
So
yeah.
I
And
want to
the
go back
cheering.
to, and the cheering. Yeah. And the
Yeah.
signs and the seeing
Yeah.
people. That's got to be good. I've never done that, but I've been to a parade and I feel like that's a very similar experience.
Just like that.
You mentioned earlier sort of this community, and I just want to touch on maybe how that has impacted you, because it is really common for people in their 30s and 40s and 50s to seek new community. That there gets to a point where, your work is your work and your family is your family and your kids start to grow up or whatever, and you just are seeking community. Now, it used to be really common, or statistically more common, for people to seek religion at that time. So maybe you weren't religious before, but now you're sort of seeking this like soft landing, this place to like connect with people with like beliefs, and so it sounds like the running community has been that for you. Was that intentional, or was that just a happy side effect of picking up the sport?
That's so great. No, I had no idea. I had no idea. And then in turn, I didn't realize that some people then would look to me and say, oh, how I'd love to do what you're doing, And so it's been a joy. And when you talk about sort of social media, and this is, it can get skewed. I'm someone that always knows that social media is curated. I know there's people that really struggle with that think, oh, someone's doing better than me. I've always been like, oh, those are pretty pictures. I put up pretty pictures. Sometimes I put up self-deprecating things, but like, I've always sort of had a real understanding. I think we came into social media at a pretty good time, versus like sort of knowing what's real and it's not real, basically. But I have really loved connecting with people. I have a pretty active TikTok. So I love connecting with people that like feel like, oh, okay, they're running every day. I know them. That's runner girl. That's this person, and so they, people call like run celebrities.
Girl 57.
Right. Run influencers. And so for me, it's actually a little bit of like, when we used to have AIM and chats and like, it would be strangers, but you would sort of feel like they were your friends because you all love Tori Amos or whatever the chat room you were in was. And so it feels a bit of a resurgence for that for me. And so I really like that piece. I like the piece that's like, they just did 12 miles, a lot of support, a lot of, what do you use? What are you doing? So you're right. It has been a surprising community that I didn't know that I needed or wanted. And here we are. Here we are.
That's awesome.
And I don't know. I don't know if it's going to last past 50. I have no idea. I'm the type of person sometimes that can be like, okay, I did my thing and I'm all done. And that was a lovely accomplishment. So, I mean, I think I'm actually looking forward to my son getting a little older and starting to run races with me. So then that feels like that could be the next level of connection, my connection with him in some of that. So I don't know, maybe he'll just be a gamer and never come out of his room. I have no idea, but that's
one
my
can
hope.
only dream, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then, in connection to really the theme of your podcast, all of that has been good for me and my body. So it's helped me sleep better, decrease some of the night waking that I had. The strength training, as you probably know, right, statistically is good for women as they age. So, I feel like I found something that at least is helping manage a little bit of that. I mean, look, if I'm raging, I can go out and just freaking run and just stop being mean to the people around me, like just go and sweat it out and cry on the side of the road and do whatever. And so that's been helpful for me in this sort of stage of life. So
it is interesting to sort of think about how much healing you've maybe done. Even, I mean, you mentioned that you and your husband did a lot of work in your 30s, but there's got to be a lot of like self-acceptance and self-love and self-confidence and healing that comes from spending 6 hours with yourself. Because I don't, and I say that because I don't think that I'm avoiding running because I'm like too afraid to deal with what's in my mind. I don't think so. I can imagine that if I had to do that, it would be hard. And over time, when you're doing that every day or every 2 days or every 3 days, that's really good quality time that you're spending with yourself. And I would have to imagine that should you choose to, it could be a very productive time, right? Very therapeutic time. Maybe not the full 6 hours, right? Because like you said, for 2.5 hours,
Yeah.
you're probably like telling yourself how much you hate that. But I really resonate with the I need a medal thing because I'm the same way. Talk about Clifton strengths, right? And one of my strengths is competition. And so if you read about it, it makes me sound like an asshole. So don't look it up. But what it essentially is that I am motivated to be better than other people, not so that I can brag, but just so that so when I would go to Orange Theory, I would look at the person next to me. And if she can run 5.5, then I can run 5.6. And that's how I could scale myself up and push myself to do. And so the competition piece of saying like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to get the medal, I think that makes a lot of sense to me and resonates with training for something is different than just aimlessly going out and running. I'm jealous of people who can do that because they never miss their exercise. They can be wherever in the world and just go do their run. And I'm high maintenance. I need like my VR and my sweatband and all the things so that I can get it done.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the thing about the medal is I always say, well, I got the same medal that the world champion did. That person crossed that line. I crossed that same line.
Yeah. So, it's all perspective.
And it does. I mean, generally, look, I don't get back from a race, although, you feel tired, but I'm not like, oh, that was sucked. I had the worst day. I hate that. You feel good. Like you just feel good. You feel happy. You feel accomplished. You feel like now you can go eat 9 hamburgers and it feels good. And so it's just something that you're right. Late in life, I thought, let me do this. And it's been lovely. And you're right. It has given me a lot of time to think about myself and get real. And I've cried more times than you would think, running, but the sweat helps. When the sweat's coming down your face, tears and sweat, they all look the same. They say the best day to run is during the rain because you can just cry and doesn't matter.
My other problem with running is every time I start, I have to poop like 20 minutes later.
Just very regular.
Is that a thing okay. No. So that's
a great question. People ask that all the time. Like, what do you do about the bathroom? I feel so blessed. I need to knock on some wood because it's probably going to happen in Berlin. I can get up in the morning, even if it's 3:50 a.m. and I'm very regular. So before my run, I usually have no problem. And actually, when we ran New York City, we didn't go to the bathroom for like 9 or 10 hours, which was wild to me because I pee quite a lot in my general life. And we were probably just so dehydrated. Yeah. But we just didn't go to the bathroom. We were like, well, how can we not go to the bathroom for that many hours? And we just didn't. But
do people wear diapers? Or do there other problems? Or like, what's the issue? How do they resolve these problems?
We're going to get real candid here. So no, usually people just go to the bathroom in their pants or they will squat. So I had a former student at UMass Lowell and had a job in IT and also had a job as the hazardous waste cleanup from the Boston Marathon. So they go after the race and they clean up all the feces that are in people's yards and toilet paper for the entire course. And so there's a lot of that. I mean, I think at some point they just say like, you don't have any, like, it's almost like having a baby. After you have a baby, you're like, everyone's seen everything. Yeah. It's fine.
Like, let it all out.
An OBGYN appointment, who cares? Like, I'll just sit there with no clothes on in the office. It doesn't matter. So I think running is the same thing. It sort of like strips you down at some point, but thank God I have never had an issue. I do carry a little toilet paper on me just in case. So a little wet wipe or something. But
that stresses me out. I guess I'm not very regular now that I think about it. It's also been 2 episodes since we talked about poop. So
perfect.
Yeah. Well, Tasha, I appreciate you so much. And I'm so glad we were able to chat. And like I said, one of the reasons I love doing this is because I always learn something from my friends and from their experiences. And so I'm really flattered that you were willing to take the time and come share that with me and all of my hundreds of 17 listeners. 17, perfect. Maybe 18.
Thanks. We love 17 or 18 listeners. So I thank you so much. It was so great to really think about where I came from and where I'm at and where I could go the next, I don't know, 46 years. So, oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. This is Hot Flashbacks. We're out.
Want more? We're on all the major podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Just search for Hot Flashbacks and subscribe.